Way back in 1950, they took an aerial photo of the school. This white dot on the field is me, waiting for the next PE class. Could I ever have foreseen that over 50 years later, I would still be here? At the end of 1944, after prize giving, I sat on the top lawn on one of those white seats and just allowed all the feelings and the sights and the sound of King's School to envelop me, because I didn't think I'd ever come back, because I was due to go back into the army almost as soon as Christmas was over. And I think that those feelings stayed with me. And when the letter came from John Morris, I thought this was an opportunity that I'd been begging for.
Every boy, every child is so different in their abilities and skills and needs. And so we work towards that very clearly and very carefully.
One of the things that struck me about Mrs. Perkins actually was her absolute rule that schoolwork should take precedence over sport.
To me, King's School's strength is the involvement and the support of the mothers, and the fact that they feel they belong, they feel welcomed by the teachers, they want to support the school, and they're made to feel welcome.
And Whangarei was home for me, and I wasn't allowed to travel on public transit. My folks couldn't come to pick me up, so just Nurse Fire-Acer and I, we were the only ones in the school. Man, it was lonely. I'll never forget that.
I got all the beds for the boys. And I made 66 mattress covers for the mattresses. Quite an achievement.
Oh, the chapel. I used to go to chapel to see the mothers' hats.
You know, Arthur Lennan, he was a very kindly man, because for the fatties like myself and others who weren't particularly athletic, when we came in last, he gave us a pat on the back and said, "Well done."
I don't really intend to spend the rest of this film using the words "I remember." But for those of you who do remember, and for those who are now taking the school on into the 21st century, the 53 years that have passed since I first joined the staff have been filled with change and interest. I would rather those who saw these changes told much of the story themselves. The first swimming pool was constructed in 1931. They had to empty and scrub it out every Sunday. Frank Hayes was a visiting swimming instructor. He was a man of skill and perseverance.
I remember he was trying to teach us to swim, and of course in order to swim we had to put our heads under the water, and he used to make us count to 10 or something of that nature, and make you call out "happy, happy me." I can't remember the exact the phrase, but he certainly had us all doing it. But you didn't want to delve away and get involved in other things in his class, because if you ever got beaten by him, it was quite severe, because it was with a wet bathing suit and with a plastic sandal.
Oh yes, yes. The plastic sandals with the little the knobs on the soles of them, and when he gave you a good whack with that on your wet togs, you had this lovely welts, nice little round red marks on your Pondas Anorum.
In 1949, a 25-yard pool was built on the same site. This water was aerated, chlorinated and filtered, and in 1974 the pool was lengthened to an international length of 25 metres and doubled in width. The task of swimming instruction has now been passed to the PE department, but the Hayes legend lives on.
You learn to swim very quickly and very fast with hay, and actually it proved there were dividends out of it. I won a lot of medals later on in life. So I've got to thank Mr. Hay. But coming back to Arthur, I think he felt that I had good handwriting or something. He made me scorer for the first 11. Now, that was fine until we were doing an away game down at St. Peter's, and for some reason somebody was sick, and so I had to join the team, and I was petrified that the ball might come my way, and actually I ended up batting. Now, I scored 4 runs, not intentionally. I just nicked the ball and there was some bad fielding and the damn thing went to the boundary. It wasn't a winning shot, I can assure you, but I felt quite proud of myself, and I think Arthur did too, as the scorer, because I did have to wear white and look the part.
The other thing, of course, that I was always astounded by, and I never really knew whether it was a sort of a guess and good luck, or whether in fact it was prodigious memory. A whole string of statistics which related to a particular game or to a particular event, and quite often it was bang on. I recall being outside the dining hall one day when a whole lot of old boys were coming back, many of whom had never met before, and you were introduced to one of them, can't recall who it was, and you said something like that to him. "Ah, Jones, I remember you. You scored 42 against Southall in the first 11, third term, 1940, whatever it was, or 50 something." And the guy just couldn't believe his eyes. It was his. I think that's remarkable. Remarkable.
I have great memories of you batting over here.
Yes. I remember the pitch well, because we played on that for hours, didn't
Yes,
we?
yes.
Always played out here in the middle. It made us run very fast between the wickets. We had George Carey at one end, Hal Marriott might be umpiring somewhere else. It was all go. We were never allowed to rest.
No. No, the number of matches that are lost or won on people not converting ones into twos and, and so forth. Now, my great memory of this particular pitch here was the 11 wicket, which used to run this way, virtually north and south.
Yeah.
And I used to switch the wickets almost all over the place. It just depended on where a decent piece of ground was after the ravages of the rugby season.
Yes.
And I remember you're on about 80, something or other, playing Dilworth, and you were batting round about here, almost identical spot. And I think I was square leg umpire and George was bowler's the end, I think. And you put one through cover point for 4, then one through mid cover for 4, the next one went through mid off for 4, the next one was a straight drive, and they all stayed on the carpet all the way. That was number 4. Number 5 was an excellent boys shot, a hoik to leg, which went way over there somewhere. And that was 5-4's 20.
I'm sure you frowned at that one.
And the last ball the over got a thick edge and went just forward a point, and you scampered through for 2 before the ball was tossed in. So that particular over is engraved in my memory, yes. And of course your father never saw it, did he?
No. He didn't, and it's engraved the date, November the 13th, 1954, and it's the day of a general election, and 13 from then on was always my lucky number.
Oh.
So it's amazing how you remember these things.
Yes. Oh well. Yeah. Mind you, both these fields have particular memories for me also. The school has junior sports in this area now, but in such a constricted space, the preparation of the grounds for senior sports occupied many frustrating hours. The curves were very tight for 13-year-olds, but we used to run a full program, and the events were spaced out over 3 days. There were only about 6 members of the staff to run it, so board members and parents helped out by acting as judges and timekeepers. Nowadays, with everything held at the Mount Smart domain, they have the facilities and the staff members to run several events at once, and no one has to mark out the track in advance.
The 3 field, I just remember as shrubs, and we couldn't really play any sport at all here. When was that developed, Arthur?
I'm just trying to think now. In the early 60s. No, late 60s would it be. Actually over on the far side is where the school should dump all their rubbish.
Yes.
Broken beds, cardboard boxes and fish heads, I suppose, and so forth. And the actual playing area was about a quarter the size of what it is now. I recall that toy grass, if you whacked a cricket ball into that, you had no show getting it out, otherwise you get your hands torn apart. And they redeveloped this field and called it the Richwhite Field because Dr. Lloyd Richwhite was chairman of the Board of Governors at the time.
Go, Southall! Your advantage.
Although I must say my best memory of that last year was playing a rugby game against Southall, and I'm not sure if the 15 had beaten Southall it certainly couldn't have for a while, because Richard Pengelly walked out to the middle of the ground and said to us that we could have a day off if we carried on winning. This was at the half-time team talk, and you'd be pleased to know that we won the game. We then all lined up waiting to be told when we could have our day off, and especially as a boarder, it was a real bonus to actually walk home and knock on the door and say I'm home for the day. I'm not sure that Mum was too pleased, but I was absolutely rapt.
We looked at that AstroTurf field, and that is the best thing we've ever done, John. Yes. An investment which we made at a time when the economy was in very bad shape. But look at the use that the boys and the school have got out of it.
I think what it tells you also is that the parents have vision.
as well as perhaps other people, because the parents were the ones that funded that field, and I think perhaps because they saw week after week sitting in ankle-deep mud that there really wasn't much object of field one, but they had the vision and they supported it, and I think they're getting the value from it now. So that's, I mean, it was fantastic, wasn't it?
Yes, if you look back to the 40s when you and I were here, and you think of that, number one field was the only ground, and we spent most of our time in my last year doing all of our training down in Dilworth. Right. And you look at this AstroTurf field now and the mileage we get out of it, it's a wonderful investment. I think the other points, obviously the major thing during Brett's time has been the demise of the boarding establishment. And I know I found it, and you did, and people like Den Old and a few other people that were real traditionalists, I found it an awfully hard decision because I'd loved my time as a boarder, and I thought boarding was an added dimension to the school. But as we both know, it was the best decision as a school we could ever make.
Yes, I think in the urban setting it suddenly lost its way, didn't it, boarding? But I must admit, looking back on the times in Dormitory 6 with all the fun we had in those dormitories, and Prince, my dog, rolling up the back stairs and sleeping on my bed, and then when we used to have dinner parties at night, I used to go downstairs with Prince and say to Mr. Lennan, who knew exactly what was going on, Mr. Lennan, my dog has come across, and across the road to Remuera Road, have a dinner party with my parents, and then back home again, and Prince was on my bed within 5 minutes again. So they were great days, they were lots of fun, but again, hard decisions have to be made. Hard decisions have to be made when they're the right ones.
Well, I was rather sorry to see it go in many ways, because it brought a lot of youngsters in from the far north or the deep south in a one store, one pub, one tiny village situation into the large city. And I'm a great believer in people and children mixing and mingling with each other.
Well, the boarding house, of course, was dominated by Nurse Friar Rasha, who was the matron of the day. She lived in what seemed to be a somewhat dark area in the middle of the main block upstairs. It was partitioned off by curtains, which she used to swish backwards and forwards with great vigour. There was always the time in the morning where if you had any problems, you had to be in there and line up, and the curtain swished back, and then at the end of it, it swished back again, and if you hadn't gone in there and you had problems, you dipped out. Nurse Friar Rasha seemed quite martial, but underneath it all she had a wonderful personality and an engaging laugh. She was full of verve, and I think this gave the boys a sense of confidence and well-being, which was necessary to young lads who needed some maternal figure. Not a soft maternal figure, Nurse Friar Rasha, but maternal nevertheless to the boys who were there.
No, I used to have to say to a lot of them, of course, I said, I've got no pills for homesickness, I'm sorry. I said, you have to live through it. So it's hard. Most of them got through it all in the end. You just got one or two boys that never overcame it.
And I remember Miss Friar Rasha, if a mother phoned and said, my son is unhappy, she would say, oh, what nonsense. And she said, well, you come here, dear. And the mother would come up and she would say, you sit down there where you can see down on the playing fields. And the mother would sit there with a cup of tea, and then she would say, now, does that boy look unhappy? And, you know, they're invariably with a gang of other kids. They seemed to be all right. But when they got home, they took it out on their mothers. Yes.
But she was a backbone, and she looked after us kids, and she was a wonderful person. And Nurse Jackson was a wonderful person, but she was younger. And the main one was Nurse Horatio, who she laid the law down, and everyone else bowed and scraped. And she was like a mother to us. And I made sure that every time I went down there, I'd go and see her. And she was very elderly then, but still a wonderful, wonderful person.
Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Though there's one motor gone, we can still carry on. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. What a show, what a fight.
Taken 4 generations of Mitchelson's appendixes out. Yes. And I was going to be the 5th. And every time I got sick, Nurse Horatio would ring Granty and say, James Mitchelson's sick. Granty would immediately ring Dad and say, James has got appendicitis, it's got to come out. And Dad would say, have you seen him yet? And Granty would say, no, I'm just going along to see him. But he was a great old character in Remuera and in the life of the school too, old McGregor Grant.
And they'd raid through the parapet windows. And I was standing with my pillow pushed firmly into the bottom of the pillowcase, and round the corner came this head. And I thought it was Salter, and I smashed it right against the side of the window, and guess who it was? Arthur Lennan. Boom, down to the common room, Hosking.
Do you remember Arthur Lennan standing outside the doors waiting for us to talk after lights out?
Very much so.
We could see his shadow. There was no talking after lights out, Ian, but there was Arthur's shadow. We knew he was there waiting for someone to talk. He'd hear it further down and skip down on those rubber shoes, trying not to be heard. But he was there, we knew he was there.
And Riggy coming in and having a rough and tumble, remember?
Yes.
He'd come in and he'd challenge anyone, and he'd end up with 30 blokes. He was reeking of whatever. and he'd have blokes, and suddenly he'd say, that's enough, remember? Yes. He's knee-high to a grasshopper, really. He was only a small bloke.
In the morning, of course, the boys all got up and went along to the shower room along here and had their morning shower. All classrooms now. And of course, the shower room is no longer here. We have a passageway through to the recreation room, is it? This is where Friar Rasher had her living quarters, and the other nurse also lived upstairs, Ronnie Jackson. Nurse Friar Rasher, of course, was here for years. Anybody connected with King's know Nurse Friar Rasher. The junior boys, when dormitories 1 and 2 were here, and there was the famous occasion when 2 dormitory 1 boys decided they'd had enough of King's School. They packed their bags, little atlas, with a route marked from Auckland Harbour down to Whitianga. They went out one night, swam out 200 yards, commandeered a yacht and set off sailing down to Whitianga. However, they were brought back, but there seemed to be the spirit of Nelson about those 2.
It's a horrifying thought that boys slept up here. There were several dormitories. This was the senior one just in front of us. Another one further along where I think there's a library now and a staff bedroom just there. And it's an even more horrifying thought that in the earlier days, before any of us were around, they used to sleep and have classes in the next story up above, and the possibility, which fortunately never eventuated, of a fire just doesn't bear thinking about.
This hall was opened just before I came to King's, and it was really regarded then as a marvellous facility. It had a magnificent stage, a great lighting box. I think that they used to boast that the lighting panel that controlled the system was the most modern in the Southern Hemisphere at its time, and it really looked as though it was. It was a great stage to appear on, and it really did have great facilities in every sense. But overall, this is